Hey guys, so today what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about how you're guaranteed to improve your game over this sort of winter period going in towards next year. And this is what I've been doing a lot with my online students recently. People that are part of my online academy, we've been sharing information, we've been sharing drills and exercises. But what I've also been able to do is I've been able to collect information on how many repetitions some of my students are doing, and therefore what are the potential milestones to progression. And that's kind of what I want to talk a little bit about today. Now, this video has also been prompted by Hole19. Now, Hole19 is an application which you can download to your phone for absolutely free. And you can just use it as a GPS tool. Lots of my students just use it as the GPS tool, which is free. And that means that if you're playing a golf course you've never seen before, you'll be able to see the outline of all the hazards, the distances to the hazards, how far you've got left to the flag. But also, if it's your home course, you can use it as well to see how far if you're progressing with your distances, or whether there's a change in weather and you have to start changing how far the golf ball is actually travelling through the air and running along the ground. Now, some of my students also use the premium features on there and they start to record their statistics and they show that to me. And I like the Hole19 application because it asks enough questions for you to become aware of how to improve, but it's not overwhelming in terms of it's asking every little finite, amount of detail. And I think for the majority of amateur golfers, that is enough. So what I've seen with my students that have been sending over the information is that their sort of miss pattern is just a little bit too wide. Okay, so their dispersion is a little bit wide. So when they're missing left and they're missing right, we've just got to try and find a way to narrow that up. And then the question would be, well, how's that going to translate for you guaranteeing to play better golf next year? Well, it's going to go something like this. On my online academy, I've written a few programs about the basics, and that's where a lot of my students tend to have most progress. The basics being alignment, posture, and if you like, swing plane, or, as I'm going to concentrate on today, club path. So what I've done is I've got an alignment stick on the floor here, which is pointing down towards my 150-yard marker in the distance. I've also got a Wedge Pro. Now this is the Wedge Pro. It's not so much important that you use a Wedge Pro for this particular training aid, but what we can see with the Wedge Pro is the height of it. So it's not like just putting an alignment stick on the floor where I can swing above it and still hit the ball. It's obviously higher than the ball. It's about 1 foot long, and I've got by the time I put the club behind the ball, it's about 1.5 inches distance away. Now, with my students that I sort of, it's funny, isn't it? Because I get a lot of my students as well to record some of the swings when they can and they're on the course. And what tends to happen is that if there's trouble on the left, the golfer tends to aim a little bit more to the right. And then what you notice is that the club path ends up being affected when you end up putting it back into trouble. So that's what I mean about the basics. The basics is alignment. The basics is trying to imagine that you're just trying to get the club nice and square on the back of the ball in this bottom part of that golf swing, and just to build a solid routine. If you can do that and do lots of repetition inside your practice session, then I'm guaranteed that you're going to improve next year. So if I sort of hit a couple of shots, it is literally, we've had a cold snap of weather here, so it is literally freezing cold. So forgive me if my first few demonstrations, or maybe all my demonstrations, are a little bit ropey. But that's a little bit left, that's a pretty good contact. So the point of this is, what I say to a lot of my students is, okay, inside a practice session, if we're looking to make a swing change or an improvement to any capacity, that's a little bit lefter. What we need to do is we need to increase the repetition. So if a student of mine is normally hitting 100 balls inside a practice session, what they need to start doing is doing at least 1, 2 or 3 practice swings before every shot. And what I would suggest, let me just hit this one, a little bit heavier but straight, is to do this first and foremost. Because I think before advancing onto a hip move or advancing onto dropping your arms down or doing some of the drill, I think what I'm trying to see with the people that are sharing the information on Hole19 and my academy members that are sharing their progress is the students that are making good strides in terms of the handicap and their progression are the ones that generally can do the basics. So they are doing more repetition in practice, they're practicing more frequently, and they're concentrating on one thing inside every practice session. If you can do that, then like I said, I'm pretty sure you're guaranteed to improve going into next year. Now that doesn't mean at some stage you can add a different swing thought in, but what I'm trying to say is if you can't stand next to your little Wedge Pro or whatever device it is that you use, and you can't hit the ground roughly in that sort of location without striking your object, then I would kind of suggest that's where you're going to kind of let yourself and get a little bit stuck. So as an added tip, one of my favourite drills is to do some single-handed arm swings as well, because this generally gets you moving the club in the correct sort of direction. It stops golfers sort of doing anything like this, you know, or anything like this. And you can equally do it trail hand only. But hopefully you can see every sort of practice swing that I'm trying to do, whether I'm achieving or not, I'm just trying to concentrate on striking the ground in the same location whilst avoiding contact with the Wedge Pro. And then that way my brain can start to see straighter lines. So as I sort of put the club here behind the ball, my mind is now looking at that 150 yard marker. I know my feet are pretty parallel to that. And then as I look, I'm just going to try and do the same sort of feeling as I'm doing with those single-handed. And again, a little bit pulley, but the dispersion is pretty close. It might be a missed green, but that's a 6 iron and that's acceptable. The contact's good. And again, just the same sort of process. So try and remember those rules when you next practice. And the thing is, if you're going to started to do it with a lot of my students, or started to at least experiment more with a lot of my students, is we're starting to write routines and practice routines down. And that might be something that you want to think about yourself. It's kind of like, think about where you want to be, and then think about theoretically how much repetition it might take for you to get there, and then break that down into every practice session, and then break that down into a weekly session and then a monthly session. Because if you're like us, where the winter is an opportunity to improve your technique, but at the same token you're going to have, we've got the rest of December, January, February, and probably into March now, where you've got 4 months, at least 3 months, to try and achieve as much repetition as you possibly can. And if you can do this, then I'm pretty sure you're guaranteed to find a way to improve. So practice more often, concentrate on the basics, and do as much repetition as you possibly can. You'll narrow the dispersion and you'll start to improve. See you soon.